What's going on, family? It's your brother Lawrence, and we're here with another episode of Watch God Work. In every episode, we come together and have a conversation with a brother or sister that is doing amazing work in every field of human endeavor. And we ask them about their God story, how God has informed, how God guides their everyday lives, how God guides their work. And this week, I am excited and I'm grateful to be here with my brother, Detavio Samuels. What's going on, good brother?
Yes, sir. I'm good, King. How are you feeling?
I'm doing well, General, man, my noble brother. Yeah, I mean, so y'all, you don't have to worry because I know a number of brothers and sisters of the nine follow us, and so we ain't gonna be a brother love fest like that. We ain't gonna put some all too much underground. But I like to get into it because Detavio, no one could do it like Sway's universe, right? So I'm not gonna run your receipts, but I'll say this much for people to set the tone a bit. This has been a brother. I'll say like he's my brother in more ways than one, but a brother that I've observed for many years, beyond kind of overlapping relationships. In some sense, I think I've chased after him. In the sense that whether going to a business school, and he was a couple of years before me, kind of an elder statesman, being connected and introduced by people, kind of like you guys just need to connect and then being one of those people where I believe, and most people know that I believe in studying people's lives, and so I have autobiographies, and his life is one of those that I've just studied and I've learned, and anytime I see news or things that he's doing, I pray over him, I pray for him, even as we've not spoken, and so this is the context in which we're coming in. Beyond him being a fellow Noop, beyond him being a person that was a Stanford Cardinal in business school, beyond him being a steward of culture, a lover of God, a child of God, one who understands our people, one who understands the need over the many different years. I come into this conversation with that. And so, Tavio, but my question to you is like, who is Detavio Samuels for the people? Who are you, brother?
Yeah, man. I so appreciate that introduction. We do so much work, and we just don't know who's watching or paying attention. Back in the days when I wrote my book, I started out by writing it as a blog, and so every Sunday I would sit down and write faithfully. And at the time, I wouldn't get a ton of feedback. Right, I would post it, might not get a bunch of feedback, and so then it becomes tough to get up that next Sunday to repeat the same process. Well, what happened and what God would do is every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks, someone would send me a note that said, Detavio, the story you just wrote touched my life. I'm so appreciative of you and the work that you're doing. I say all that to say, I learned at that time, this is probably back in 2012, that my job was to write for the ghost. That like my job was to tell my story, to be an open book, that I had no clue what the bystander effect would be, that I would have no clue who would be watching, that I would have no clue who could potentially be blessed through the way God was working through my life. And so this is just such a strong reminder that God pours into you. Our job is just to show up in our most authentic, realist way. And there's always people watching. So just thank you for having me here, brother. Good to see you. In terms of just who I am, it's such a layered question. But ultimately, I would always define myself as God's child first. I have been a child of God since the time that I can remember. I am grateful that my mother and my father would probably both say that the greatest gift they gave me was the gift of relationship with God and with Christ. And so, if all things, I prioritize and put that first. After that, most people probably know me as almost like a family and a friend man. Like, so it's like God, family, and friends. I am protective about my family. I just believe that family takes care of family in all ways, and I have a very broad family. Whether you're talking about people at work, whether you're talking about blood, etc. And then the last piece is, man, I'm just a businessman who loves the culture, right? Like I believe that God has given me a mission to help people and businesses rewrite their stories of the future. And so I'm here as a servant just to make that happen and manifest itself. And so when I go to a company, I want to see that company rewrite the story they had before I got there. When I'm working with advertisers and brands, I want to help them rewrite their story and point them towards growth. And then for the people that I get the opportunity to touch, in all ways, I want to see the little bit I can do to help them rewrite their story and be on a higher trajectory. So those are the ways that I see myself, at least in terms of how we're going to start the conversation today.
Yeah, brother. One is interesting, just that came quote unquote last, right?
Okay.
That the business and the work, albeit
Yep.
valuable, albeit very intentional, and feeling called and having purpose for it, that came after your identity of being right a
Facts.
child of someone connected to others who then happens to
Facts.
serve. and I think that's instructive. I think what's interesting about you among innumerable things is the balance of skills and gifts. Meaning, typically, I always say that God is the greatest creative of all time. That's my saying,
I
right? So
love
from
that.
the
Yeah,
very
yeah, I love
beginning,
that.
right? But then the balance of skills in industry to have the creative appreciation and lens, and then the business acumen often seems like you either have one, and then the business people are like, I need to get you back here. And then there's the business people, and then the creative, like this, they're yelling at the CFO, the operator, like, yo, we need this. You know what I mean? When did you kind of identify that, that you were kind of living in these two extremes of, not so much extremes, but just this tension, man? Was it a
Yep.
tension? Where did that start?
Yeah, so probably back in my days at Global Hue. So when I'm at Global Hue, it's the first time where I'm actually leading real creatives, right? And so that's when I get visibility into the creative process. So a budding business person back then, but now I get creative insight. And I quickly realized that I myself am not a creative genius. I would actually not even define myself as a business genius at all. I believe that what God has done for me is He has given me a gift where I am both suit and creative, where I'm not 100% suit and I'm not 100% creative. I'm one of the few people who's 50-50 and can sit between them both and have conversations with them both and help them go back and forth between each other, right? So I'm the bridge, I'm the translator, I'm the person who can come into a company with Revolt who wants to be creative first and figure out how to make that manifest itself in a way that still works for the business, right? So that is the gift that God has given me. And so then the tension, that for me, there is no tension because I believe that for me, the world, that everything exists in the intersection. And then the same is true for me and God, right? There is no Detavio over here and God over there. People always ask me what my interview process with Sean was like. And two things happened in that conversation that shaped my belief that this was the right place for me to be. One is he asked me, what's on your resume about you? What do I need to know about you that's not on your resume? And I said to him very cleanly that I am a man of God. I'm not going to run up in your company hitting people over the head with the Bible, but I'm going to carry myself with a sense of character and integrity that I believe aligns with who he is. That's one. And he was like, cool, like he loved it, right? So even in my interview, I'm bringing God with me because I want him to know who I am, right? So again, for me, that tension doesn't exist. I'm always trying to be my full self in every space. And so at the end of that interview, he was getting ready to go in for surgery. And so I just say to him, Sean, I don't call him Sean, Mr. Combs, I will say a prayer for you when we get off of this call. And he looks at me and he says, well, why are you waiting until we get off of this call? Like, say a prayer for me now, black man, right? So in my first conversation with him, I am A, identifying who I am to him so that he's clear, and B, he was super receptive to the point where I prayed for the man in our very first conversation, right? And so for me, I'm always trying to find ways to bring my full self to the table, whether it is being both creative and suit, whether it's being businessman and Christ-like, all of these things I try to keep with me at all times.
Brother, there's a lot in that, man. There's the richness of they call this kind of like homosis, right? This idea of kind of God as kind of like fully human, fully God. I think this is going to help, particularly because I think a lot of times when people conceive about God, they think that I'm giving up myself, I'm giving up so much. But what's very interesting about your story is that you've, in many contexts where you're at this position of great responsibility and stewarding your team for a mission, you've come into places where there was history already, right? You know what I'm saying? There's history. So, he gonna keep it on the humble as we should. But global here, you talking about Coleman, the name. You know what I'm saying? People know the McD's, the Walmart. You know what I mean? You talk about you go into kind of, the interactive one, kind of I one, but you're still touching Hughes as a name. And now you're coming into Revolt. There's something about how I renew, make better, bring new life into something that's existed, has been a part of your story. What has kind of like, what have you experienced? What has allowed you to do that? Do you notice that pattern that you're always stepping into something like that?
Yeah, it is. But that I just believe is part of my mission. I have a tattoo right here that says, I believe that God has put me on earth. It's my purpose tattoo. Three
Mm,
different things. God has put me on earth to impact my culture. God has put me on earth to impact commerce. And God has put me on earth to help push the kingdom of God, to help people see Christ. Those three things. And so I'm always motivated, even like, for whatever job I take, can I do all three of those things at one time, right? It is
mm,
how he built me. It is how I fuel myself. I am so excited about what's happening at Revolt right now because the change is monumental, and that monumental change makes me exciting. I believe that it is not my job to run into places and say, Christ, 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 Christ. That's not how you get people to him. But when I walk into a building and I say, God, have your way, and when people see things begin to shift, they'll say it's because of me, but then I will continue to point them to him, right? And
mm.
so for me, I just think I'm clear on the purpose and the mission. I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm here to be a change agent. The only way to get there is to be clear on who the source is and to stay connected. And I just try to do that in everything that I do.
Yeah, yeah. This is great because I point this out because a lot of times there's this misconception, maybe not conscious, that leadership is ego. Leadership is I'm just gonna create, but there's so much about leadership that's service. That I'm coming in to serve this space, and so I just find it remarkable that in these stories where someone's ego could be like, I'm stepping into someone's else's, you're like, no, I'm here as a servant, so that's why I can come
Brother,
into this space.
I, without God, I am all ego. I'm that person who is literally 1 inch away from probably being the most arrogant person you know. It's like like when I think about it, it's such an interesting thing because in general you think of like humility and arrogance on like very opposite ends of the spectrum.
Mm,
For me, I literally think they're right here, and it
mm,
is my connection to God that keeps me super humble. And I'm super afraid that if I ever lose sight of my source, that arrogance is so close it can seep in, and that's what you often see happen to take people down. My best friend was a pastor. My best friend's father was my pastor growing up, and
mm.
so there would be men of God, coming around his house or to the church all the time, and I used to say, how is it possible that these men of God can stumble so hard in such a very public way? And he would just tell me, you don't know what it's like to feel like God is speaking through you, to touch 10,000 people at one time, to pray for people and them to be healed. That when you are operating in that way, it is super easy to get an ego. It is super easy to think that it is you. And so I think that just from a child, I've been like, I never want to be that person. I never want to lose sight of where my true power and my true strength comes from.
Mm.
And so grateful that I had those lessons early. So now I'm able to carry them out now because I really do believe that if I lost sight, I could be a very different being. And in that different being, I don't believe that God would be blessing the things that I'm fortunate to touch in the way that He's blessing.
Bruh, I mean, be careful lest you stumble, right? Lest one stumble, man. It's real. I want you to kind of unpack this a bit because I think for so many people, let's say who kind of just like, you know what, man, I heard about God. I may have grew up around it, but now I have such responsibility in the work that I do. I also lead. I own a P&L, all that good stuff. But something that seems so amorphous is the starting point, right? So a lot of time people are like, yo, I grew up, my parents gave me the gift, they raised me up in the Lord. But it's like, oh, is it because like your parents? Maybe some part of it is just like, but what was it to you? Like what made
Yeah,
it
yeah,
like this is something I need? Like, what was that
yeah.
moment for you when you were like, oh, this news is good. I'm gonna need this, fam.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll say two things. So one is just as a child, I grew up with a lot of lack, right? So
Mm,
there's a time my parents became separated when I was very young. There was a time when we experienced homelessness. My mom didn't make a lot of money for many, many years.
mm,
So it was one of those kind of like struggling single mother stories. In that time period, as a young kid, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, my mom is consistently saying, when we are without, pray to God and it will happen. I want to play football. It's $200 for football equipment. I don't have it. My mom, pray to God. He will bring it to fruition. I would go to church. I remember Monday night prayer. White dude walks up to me, hands my mom a check for $200. God put this on my heart to tell you, like, to give you this money, the exact amount of money that I need. I can run that play over and over and over as a child, where consistently having faith, I was able to connect the dots and see God show up.
mm,
Fast forward to this point about like, oh, at some point in time though, you have to own it for yourself. That for me happens when I moved to Detroit and go to Global Hue. So that is 2007. I sit underneath an amazing man of God who is still a father to me in the spirit, Apostle Donald Coleman. And it was one of the first times when I think I got to see a man, a black man, talk like a man of God in such close proximity. And I think that I was mesmerized and appreciative of what I was getting to see every Sunday. And so then fast forward when I'm in Detroit in 2007, I'm not only working for a man named Donald Coleman, I'm going to church with a man whose name is Apostle Donald Coleman. And it was my first time that I really got to see a man of God who looked like me represent himself in such a way and an example that I wanted what he had. And I was fortunate enough that we were able to build a relationship. But I would say that 2007, 2008 year is a year where it goes from being the religion of my mother to the religion of myself, where I do my own deep dive, where I, even to this day, and me and my mother and I are like in battles right now on a whole bunch of things spiritually, right? Like we don't even align anymore because at this point in time, it is now my faith, not her faith, right? And I'm standing based on what I believe. And so it's just a function of God being really faithful as a child, kind of that like crucible catalyst moment in like 2007, 2008, where I go on my own journey. And then that sets me up for the journey that I've been on ever since.
This is going to be gems, particularly because I think, we're at this stage in life. I mean, whether people have gotten married, having kids, and even for that story, you're familiar with this. But understanding, like, what does that look like, especially for those who are kind of wrestling with it now with their generation, and seeing and hearing a story of like, these things are not insignificant, right? Them coming into your room and you're at that praying, or I'm asking you to do this, but look how lucid you are about what impact that had. That is the greatest gift to be given.
You can't. There's nobody can tell me anything about God not being faithful. Like I have 1,000 stories from my childhood alone. Like good luck. You know what I mean? Like you can't get me off of this. I've seen it. I've tasted it. I believe and know that I am only good when I am in lockstep with Him. And so like it can be very frustrating for people, but I refuse to make big decisions without getting in alignment and peace with Him, because I know that when I'm moving with Him, like everything blows up for good. And so why play the game any differently?
Bruh, I want to get now into a little bit of the meat of the nature of the work, because I think there's this tension. For anyone who kind of follows, believes in the culture, you've been at the fulcrum of a lot, right? Obviously, the onset of digital, how digital has kind of transformed media, spend, what ROI is, all these things happening. So there's the medium, and then there's message. And a lot of times I've spoken to brothers and sisters who struggle with, right? One of my good sisters who, was a, sister of faith at Def Jam, right? Another brother who's moving at another record company or another movie studio, who are like, all right, I'm grateful to be able to be at this helm of building this great platform to reach people. But sometimes I have tension with the message or with this. What has that journey looked like for you, right? In that, let's say intersection per se, not so much tension, but intersection.
Yeah, so that's I mean, and I do feel that one as a tension quite often, right? Even in coming to Revolt, it was kind of like, should I come to Revolt? Because hip hop is hip hop, right? And there are definitely going to be places where hip hop and my spiritual beliefs do not connect. For me, I think that one way to look at it is, oh my God, there's going to be a tension. The other way to look at it is, oh my God, what a tremendous opportunity to walk into these spaces where they may be hurting, where they may be in pain, where they don't know Him, and be able to be a light. And so I think that ultimately I just got more caught up with the opportunity and what God was potentially doing. I do not believe in a world where we all just go to church, see each other every Sunday, and we feel like we did our work, right? Our job is to be out in the field. The office, my employees, the company, that's my church. That's where I get to have impact. That's where I get to speak into people's spirits in ways that I might not get to do otherwise. And so I just got caught up on the opportunity, man. And that's what I'm saying. Like, who knows what God is going to do? And if hip hop is driving global culture, and if his son, Sean Combs, sees God, and if his other son, Detavio Samuels, sees God, like, what do the combination of those things do? I'll spoil something for you because, we'll see if this goes viral. I hope it doesn't, because it won't go viral, but it's confidential. But anyways, I'll tell you this thing. We've launched shows that, people will see and be like, oh, that does not align with what we believe God's values are. It is what it is. We're doing what we believe is right for the culture. At the same time, I'm bringing balance in. And so in March, we will make an announcement that we will now be distributing TD Jakes every Sunday, and telling and his sermons, right? I believe he is one of the most, if not the most prolific, like, voice of God now, right?
He's in the
And
rafters.
so
He's hanging in the rafters. The jersey's hanging in the rafters.
exactly, exactly, exactly. I think, and this is the thing, I think Christians we become so holy and mighty that we separate ourselves from the work, right? And my thing is like, nah, let's jump in the work and bring God with us. So I'm going to do the work of hip hop because that is the assignment. But I'm also going to bring God with me. So hope y'all tune in on Sundays to see TD Jakes.
Yeah. No. He's the man. You're speaking a word, because I think I want to speak to particularly the brothers and sisters who, I think this is why this is important around work, because they may have come out of context where that affirmation to go out into the world
Yes,
and
yes.
and to do the work, to be a light, to be amongst the people as Jesus, for those who may or may even be curious about him and hearing this, right? That there is a mandate for that, there is a model for that, there is a blueprint for that. But the truth is, just to be fair, well intentioned or not, the view has been, no, it's fear based. No, you don't belong there, and you're separating yourself from. And so that's why I think this is. I want. I is so grateful that you said that, because I want people to feel that fire to say there's purpose for me
Yeah,
here. There's a call for
yeah,
me here. There's opportunity for me here. Second, I'm a child, love hip hop through and through. It's in my
yeah,
veins, soul,
yeah,
all that. But
yeah.
the truth is that even with our limited view, there's been a view of, like, our prophets of our time have come from hip hop. The
Yeah,
prophets of our time, the
absolutely.
ones who's been speaking out. And so I appreciate you underscoring that, right? And also the need for people to be in these spaces intentionally. I'm gonna take it even another step with you,
Yeah,
brother, because I think that this tension is real. But I think that one thing that people struggle with is, what does this actually look like? And there's a story I
mhm,
heard. I don't know, maybe a
mhm.
birdie. I know we may have mutual birdies that send us kites, but a story I heard about you being intentional about having praying people around you. And
Oh
there'd be
yeah,
times when you're about to go in and do a deal or have a meeting, and that you would have somebody on your team. You didn't ask them. They on
yeah.
their own would go into your office and pray as you were walking out to
That's
that meeting. Brother, talk about what it's looked like for you to actually bring it to work and bring the fiber of that beyond yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So I will say that at Interactive One is probably the fullest where I've ever been able to see that kind of manifest itself. But 100% true. So I think two things. I just posted something on social media, reposted it probably from Biggs, who is always dropping
Oh,
gems.
he.
But it, but it, but it was whatever the post that was just kind of like prayer is a major part of my business model,
Yep.
or like my business strategy, right? And so for me, it's two pieces of prayer. It's the work that I do intentionally. I find that I'm actually my best if I'm connecting with God in the morning and connecting with Him in the afternoon and the evening.
Mm-hmm.
That if I process my day with Him, then I can get new insights, new thoughts, and just take time to kind of like process what happened throughout the day. That's when I'm my best. So I try to do that as often as possible. The second one is to surround myself with praying people. And I won't even lie, I'm actually just specifically going to say praying Black women, because the
Mm-hmm.
prayers of Black women are like ridiculous. Like, my mom is still that Black woman who wake up at 4 o'clock, don't even have a job to go to, wake up at 4 o'clock and pray for 2 hours, right? Like, I'm trying to get those people on my team. I'm not a 2 hour prayer, I won't
Yep.
even lie. But I want them on my squad.
Yep.
Right? And so at Interactive One, I had who has become a good friend, but the most amazing executive assistant, Yvette Blake. And
Mm.
we had a relationship where she knew all of my truths. And because she was praying for me, I want her to know all of it. I want you to know what's happening in personal. I want you, because if you're going to go into prayer for an hour, I want you to catch it all, right? And so, yes, like she would know everything. I'd step out and go into a meeting with Alfred. I'd step out and go into a pitch, and she would walk right into my office and just start praying for me. She would bring the praying mothers from her church to I remember one time I traveled for 2 weeks. I walked in the office and I just said, the spirit don't feel right in here. Like something that Saturday, she had all the praying women from her church up in there praying, laying hands, anointing, right? Like, brother, like the intangibles that type of thing brings to the table. And I'm saying her, but there were multiple ones. There were, I don't want to name a bunch of names because I'll miss them, but there were several people in the organization who were all praying for us. And so I believe in that. I believe it's a critical piece of the business model. It's, again, another piece I never want to leave on the table.
Oh man, brother, I think you've given some people some tangible things because this is great. One, to be prayed for and to kind of surround yourself. I think we people understand this even as it relates to whether they talk about board or my personal board from a business perspective to
Yep.
say these are my thought partners, right?
Yep.
But similarly from a faith perspective,
Love that.
it's just
Love
like
that.
I have prayer partners, and then also being that for someone else, right?
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
being willing and how that brings you closer together. To your point, that person knows your truths. Well, in friendship,
Yep.
the connection is because this person knows you. And
That's right.
so, brother, I think you're gonna bless so many people with that because I think there are people who do hunger to bring it more to their day-to-day lives but don't know what it looks like. And I think that
Mm.
you give a template, though people should refine it for what makes sense. That really really helps. I want to talk into this just while I have you, brother. I
Yeah,
have
of
to
course.
ask you this, but I'm asking this with a brother license.
Mm.
Because of that connection we have. But a
Mm.
lot of people have gone through a lot. And I'm not just saying, even when you're talking about when you're a global hero at this time, this is 2000, 2008, the bottom fell out. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have a pandemic. You have people who have navigated and are navigating um, challenges, loss,
Mm-hmm.
and you have walked that in different stages of your life, but you've walked that more recently. I would ask, what has that looked like? Now
Mm.
having this great responsibility, this transition that's happened in this year, and then
Mm-hmm.
navigating such a transition in your life where you're like, oh, this is going to
Mm-hmm.
ask so much of me. What
Mm-hmm.
has God being a part of your life look like in this season that where people could relate to
Yeah.
loss and transitions?
Yeah, man. And it's something I've been wanting to say this whole conversation, but my brain is a little foggy. But the idea, it's so funny when we talk about like, oh, people feel like they can't bring God to work or they can't do these things. And for me, it's like I don't even understand how people do that. I don't understand how you make it through life. We will all run into places that are going to be too big for us. I don't understand how you solve that if you don't have God. It is the most freeing thing to not be looking like you won't hit your numbers in August and to be like, God, I can't do it. If you don't come in and do it, like we not gonna get there. And so at this point in time, I put all my faith in. If I don't have that as an outlet, I actually don't know how I make it. Right. So the answer to this question is very much rooted in that truth. Um, because I have so much faith in God, because at the time when and one of the things you're kind of pointing to is I lost my father a year ago this month in February. The blessing for me is that we saw it coming. The blessing for me is that as men, we had all the conversations, we cried all the tears, we did all the things we needed to do together. So by the time he passed, I had no regrets, and I'm eternally grateful for that. But when I tell you that God was talking to me so much at that time about what to do, where to go, where to be, that even the transition, I just feel like I am so locked in. Let me give you a couple of examples. Right before my father passed, I made a trip to Detroit. Took time to see Apostle Coleman. Apostle Coleman, just sitting down having lunch with him. Brother didn't even tell me he was on the fast, couldn't even eat, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there talking to him, and he's like, so before I came, I spent time with God, and he told me to tell you these things. Now, mind you, at this point in time, it's probably January, so like weeks before my father's about to pass. And I personally was not seriously giving the Revolt opportunity a real look, right? there's some past history, and I just was like, this isn't going to be a real thing. He looks me in my face and says, God told me that there are real opportunities in front of you that you are not paying attention to. You're glancing at them, but he wants you to take a hard look. One of these opportunities is with the king. And he's like, and I don't understand it because you're one of the most connected, well-networked people that I know. But whoever this person is like that times 10, right? In my mind, I'm sitting in front of this man who I've told nothing about the Revolt opportunity. Even when I tell him about Sean Combs, he does not know who he is, right? But for him, it's just confirmation for both of us. So those types of things were happening. At the same time, let's go a few weeks later to my father's funeral, February 7th, which was his birthday. I'm watching people get on stage, celebrate, and talk about my father, which was a blessing because now I'm getting to see and hear who he was as a man and as an adult, not as a 5-year-old kid. As a 5-year-old kid, I saw it through my lens. Now I'm seeing it through other grown-ups' lens. It was shocking to me how close the way people talk about him and the way that people would talk about me. It was like mind-boggling to see that, like, the way that I would state his purpose and his mission was, as an educator, he was going into white spaces, celebrating Black culture, trying to get them to understand Black culture, and trying to make things better for his people. I do the same exact thing every single day, except in the media landscape. And so there were all these things. So even though he was passing, I now had a new connection to helping extend his legacy. I'm doing it every day through this work. Even though he passed, I had guidance from my pastor saying, brother, you need to seriously take a look at this opportunity. And so again, because of the God that is in my life, though it was incredibly difficult, I also was felt 100% convinced that I was making the right decision and doing what God was asking me to do. And so in that sense, then you come back to the original thing, which is whenever I feel like I'm in lockstep with God, I am good because I know I can't lose, right? And so all of those things, and there's a million other things I can tell you about, things that God said into my life that make it clear that I'm supposed to be where I am right now. And so as long as I have that confidence that he and I are moving at the same speed and moving at the same frequency, it's like I can't lose because he is everything. Let me give you one more
This is
before I go.
keep going. This is the J to Beans. So, no, that's the free. Keep going. You know what I'm saying? Keep going,
you
bro.
and you'll edit it and figure out what you want to keep. But let me hit this piece for you. That also gets me here and shows you how God is just moving in my life. So let's take this idea of a king. One of Miles Monroe used to say that Christians in America really struggle with Christianity because they're not used to being ruled by a king or a monarch, right? We live in a democracy where whatever the people say is what's best for everybody, right? Biblically, that's never been true, right? But that is the culture of America, which I, in America, fully support and embrace. But the idea that because this is our truth in this country, we would wrestle in the spiritual world with an idea of a God who says, you can't do this, you can't do that, be this, do that, right? Those become difficult ideas to wrestle with. So we don't understand what it's like to move with the king. Okay, fast forward. I'm now at Revolt, and I truly consider Sean Combs a king, an earthly king. It is amazing to see how much of a cheat code a king can be for a business. It is amazing to see how an earthly king can move. I'll give you, we were working on a pitch for a brand, and my boss was pushing me to make the idea bigger. And my response back was, I can make the idea bigger, but they're not going to buy it. And he looks at me and he says, bruh, when it comes to Sean Combs, you always pitch the unrealistic. You always pitch the impossible. Okay, now connect those dots. If with an earthly king, I always pitch the impossible. If with the earthly king, I always expect the unrealistic. My God, how much bigger should my expectation be? My God, how much bigger is my cheat code? My God, right? Like, and so I'm like watching God, who is just showing me in an earthly realm what exists in a spiritual world. And that is what is growing my expectation. That is what's making me dream bigger. Not just because I'm partnered with a guy who is an icon in hip hop and globally, but because I'm connected to a God who is bigger than all of that. You know what I mean? So anyways, I just wanted to share that piece.
No, brother, you can't matter
broken.
of fact that, man. Let the track breathe. Let that breathe, y'all. You mean like that is goosebump ministry? Like what you are saying, how much more? If with an earthly
Yeah.
king, how much more? Right?
Yes.
And that is the beauty, right? Because I think that there are people who will come at the end of themselves and have nothing else. So that's why
Yeah.
there is no hope, right? So it's only as far as I
Yes.
can see. So in these
Yes.
impossible moments, then there's nothing to live for. There's nothing
That's
to be
right.
motivated for. So I'm just
That's
going to
right.
try to deal with this limited
That's
possibility and go to all of these things in life that are going to help me just be able to
that's right.
polish up the mess that I can look
That's right.
versus this is endless. The
That's right.
possibilities and leaving that. I don't want to speak over that.
Yeah. And thank you for connecting that dot, because that's exactly what I was trying to get to, right? That we live and serve a God who is tremendous. I cannot imagine my life without the belief within Him and without the relationship in Him. And I'm so grateful. I wish other people who were struggling had the opportunity to see how people with power on earth move. Because if they could just have a glance at what that life is like, I believe they would have a better understanding of like the power that our God brings to the table. And it's also this thing that He's doing in me, which is like we talked a little bit earlier about like the separation piece. For me, there's also no separation because God, the Bible says that God breathed life in me. The Bible says that the Holy Spirit lives in me. There can't be separate. I'm like, I always say like I'm not the smartest dude. I'm the most simplistic dude. It's literally like if I believe God for what He said, just point blank, if I just take that. So then I come back to this thought, which is if I believe what God said, if I believe that He lives in me, then I can't separate. Every time I step on a Zoom call, He is there. Every time I pick up a phone call, He is there. Is no separation because if I believe that His breath and that His Spirit is in me, when I step in the room, I'm bringing Him into every situation. And I think He's also just been on me about that in terms of agency. I think so often we just kind of throw our hands up and go, okay, God, right? And I always tell people, like, I believe in the supernatural. I believe in the super, like there is no tomorrow. But I also believe that we have to do the work in the natural. It is the combination of both the supernatural. And now, but I'm really understanding that in my natural being, it is also super because He is in me. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost like supernatural that I'm
Yeah.
trying to like, you know what I mean? That I'm trying to learn how to like step into that space. And what does that look like when I no longer believe that the natural is just me, but it is a me that is powered by, filled by, energized by Spirit. And does that make me show up in a different way than I've showed up in the past?
Brother, man, there are you broke that down in ways that I think people will receive and sit with. Because there's a complex theological concept. They're like, yo, he just broke that. But I think that will help. I want that energy to kind of go into now moving forward as we look forward,
Yep.
partly to give you space to even speak to brothers and sisters at this moment in history in this time, but also just to talk a little bit more about the what looking forward in the work. One thing I think people could recognize is the shift,
Mm.
particularly if your work now, and so much of the focus of the cause, the movement,
Mm.
and how much that is even shaping the composition of, let's say, revolt in the content you have coming out. And so, how does God inform that? The God of Exodus, the God of you. How does God inform how you guys are thinking about the content that you're putting out? Because people notice, we see who
Yeah.
you. We're peeping that, and we loving the energy. How does that play into that? I want to give you space for that.
Yeah, so that to me is again like a very simplistic thing. If I believe that I'm truly in relationship with God, then again we are having daily conversations in the morning and in the evening. And as things are happening, I'm checking in with my spirit. Am I at peace about these things? Is this a good idea or a God idea, right? And so for me, I want to like there's nothing magical to it, right? In my day, I will meet God as many times as possible. At some point in time at night, I will sit with Him with all the things that are business decisions, show decisions, people decisions, and wait for Him to speak to me. And as I hear whatever comes up in my spirit, or as I get to peace with whatever the thing is that I'm wrestling with, then I will wake up the next day and go execute. It's really that simple. That God, the Bible says that we are to pray without ceasing. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, it is not like, oh, one big decision. God, it's like, no, 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 no. Hey, God, checking in. This is what's going on. How we feeling about this, right? That is how I move, and that has been the benefit for me.
Brother, if you could speak to a brother or sister now who is hearing this, right? They just find themselves in a unique space of responsibility that they are just in rooms. Their gifts have made space for them, and they're still struggling with the God thing. There's just something about this that doesn't make sense. Doesn't seem like it's for them. Like, how what would you say to them today in view of your story and in view of your journey and your
Mm-hmm.
walk? What would you say to somebody who's still curious, still unsure about what this could even look like?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. Um, my words to somebody in that situation would be a couple of things. One, do not overthink it, right? I think, again, too often we make things more complicated than they need to be. It is so easy to know you have a meeting, take 30 seconds before you walk into that room, say, God, meet me here. I actually saw you do it before we started, right?
Mm,
Right before we started. I don't even remember what you said, but I saw you do it quick, like, God, have your way in this moment. That's easy. That's light
mm,
work. So the first thing is don't overcomplicate it. The second thing is when we show up, not as people who are proselytizing, trying to change people's beliefs, but when we just show up with light, with authentic light,
mm,
people will be attracted to it. My fundamental belief is that people don't go to hell for sinning, they go to hell for not believing. And
mm,
so the key to getting people to believe is a heart change. The only way to connect with people on a heart change is heart to heart. And so you show up in the fullness of light and the fullness of his source in your heart, and people will find their way to you. Those people who believe the way you believe, those they will see you, they will find you, and little by little you'll start to see, okay, now we got a prayer group of 5. Now we got a prayer group of 10, right? But again, don't overcomplicate it. Like, I'm never a big believer in the whole, like, take the Bible and hit people over the head with it. No, bruh. You do your work. Say your prayers in the morning. Meditate. Be connected. Do the little things. God, before I walk in this meeting, have your way. You do those things, you trust the process, and then you let God do the rest.
mm. Brothers, sisters, that is a gem, and I think it's a timeless one to take with you, no matter what stage you are, no matter where you are with God. To simplify, to give God space to move, is important. And I thank you, and I think on behalf of the many brothers and sisters who are listening to this now, who are watching this now, brother, I want to say thank you. I want to thank God for the positions that he's put you in today, the preparation that he's given you through. We want to thank him in advance for where he's going to take you. We want to thank you for the risk and the courage it's taking for some of the things that you all are doing content wise. I want to thank you for the vulnerability and the space that you make for brothers and sisters online and offline that many people don't even know about. I just want to thank you for your faithfulness. I want to thank you for your time. Detavio, thank you, thank you, thank you. Got to ask for the people. How do they find you? How do they connect? They get exist no more. How do they get the book? How do they connect with the world of my brother Detavio Samuels? How do people connect with you, bro?
It's super easy. God gave me an easy name. Well, not easy, but once you know it, I'm easy to find. So Detavio, Detavio. It is literally everything. Detavio, Gmail, Facebook is Detavio, LinkedIn's Detavio, Twitter's Detavio, and so everything. Just if you know my first name, you can find me. And then with that, I would just want to say back to you, brother. Thank you for giving me this space. I will remember it for the rest of my life as I am becoming more vocal about the total God story that exists in my life. I do not believe I will ever forget the first brother who gave me space to have that full conversation. And it's so interesting because even right now in the back of my mind, it's like, oh, I feel like I was like a C plus or a D minus, right? Which happens. It's our human
Yeah.
self. But I also just, again, it's like, but when you believe God, you're like, oh, God, I gave him a C minus and you're going to touch it and make it an A. Like, that's what I do all the
Hey,
time, right? But
hey.
it's so crazy how even in our own minds, when we show up, we can talk ourselves out of it. But I just want you to know, thank you for this. Thank you for giving me space. I hope we get to do it again. There's so much more
Yes.
that I believe that you and I have to accomplish together, converse together, etc. So thank you for being hearing God's word, creating a space to have conversation, and having me here, brother. I appreciate you.
Brother, I appreciate you. All respect. Thank you. Thank God.
Luke King.
Okay.
Yeah, thank God.
Salute.